A patient comes in with an acute stroke or a STEMI. The medical team treats them immediately. Life-saving care cannot wait for administrative permission. But the American healthcare system runs on prior authorization, a process built entirely around getting permission before the care is delivered. This chart shows the administrative weight of standard authorizations. Physicians and their staff now spend roughly 13 hours every week completing an average of 40 prior authorization requests. That is nearly a third of a standard work week consumed by paperwork that doesn't generate a single dollar of direct patient care. When emergent care forces that sequence to happen in reverse, you enter the dangerous territory of retro prior authorization. This is a drastically under-resourced workflow applied only after the patient has been treated. It is mandatory for sudden, severe events. Emergency department workups, same-day inpatient admissions, emergent catheterizations, or pulmonary embolism workups all trigger this strict after-the-fact requirement. The medical reality demands speed, but the administrative rules demand meticulous, retroactive documentation. That structural friction creates one of the largest hidden revenue leaks in modern medical practice. Every payer gives providers a specific retro window to file the paperwork, usually 7 to 14 calendar days, but the countdown clock begins the exact day the medical service was rendered, not the day a denial arrives. Within those few days, the practice has to prove 3 distinct things simultaneously. The care was medically necessary, standard authorization wasn't feasible at the time, and the submission is landing within the retro window. This timeline shows why standard billing cycles fail. If a practice batches denial reviews weekly, cases age out before files are opened. Practices assume emergencies like STEMIs are auto-authorized. They are not. This donut chart shows 81.7% of appealed retro denials are eventually overturned. When 8 out of 10 appeals result in an overturn, it proves the clinical necessity was never the issue. The initial denial occurred because the first submissions simply lacked the specific documentation the payer required. Practices are losing money on legitimate, necessary care simply because their internal administrative tempo is mathematically out of sync with rigid payer deadlines. The default response to this problem is usually a hiring push. Practices try to bring on dedicated in-house prior authorization coordinators to manage the queue. This breakdown illustrates the true cost of that approach. A coordinator's base salary might start around $46,000. But once you add benefits, payroll taxes, training time, and overhead, the fully loaded cost scales up to $84,000 per year, keeping human staff current on the constantly shifting emergent care exceptions across dozens of different payer plans. And when those initial submissions inevitably fail, the case escalates to the most friction-heavy layer of all, the peer-to-peer review. Cardiologists and neurologists are forced to take an hour out of their clinical schedule to explain why an emergent catheterization was necessary, often speaking to a payer reviewer who lacks the specialty training to evaluate that specific decision. Throwing expensive, generalized human labor at a highly timed, specialized problem doesn't secure the revenue. It just amplifies physician burnout. A growing number of enterprise practices are abandoning the in-house model. They're outsourcing retro PA entirely to specialized teams operating directly inside the practice's existing EMR. Here is how that engineered workflow functions. Step 1. Automated intelligence continuously sweeps the system to detect missed prior authorization triggers immediately post-service. By automating 80% of manual keystrokes, the system eliminates data entry bottlenecks. Step 2. The system automatically assembles required documentation, pulling the ED narrative, triage acuity, labs, and imaging into a unified master file. Step 3. The AI hands the case over to an AAPC credentialed specialist. This trained human expert steps in to draft a highly specific clinical necessity narrative tailored to the payer's exact criteria. Step 4. The finalized retro request is submitted perfectly within that specific payer's narrow retro window, ensuring it doesn't get rejected on a technicality. Finally, Step 5 prepares the physician for any potential follow-up. If a peer-to-peer call is required, the treating physician receives a concise, payer-specific briefing packet with policy citations and clinical guidelines before they ever pick up the phone. This hybrid architecture handles the clerical heavy lifting while human experts own the clinical judgment, averaging a 4-hour turnaround from initial intake to final submission. When a physician enters a peer-to-peer call armed with an AI-prepared briefing, the dynamic shifts entirely. The conversation becomes a factual defense of necessity rather than an unprepared scramble. This diagram compares the two models directly. Instead of absorbing that $84,000 annual in-house burden, an outsourced Staffingly team costs roughly $20,748 per year. And because medical data is involved, this external integration is secured by a full enterprise-grade compliance framework that is HITABS CSF aligned. But the true advantage is institutional memory. This system brings the collective payer relationship knowledge of hundreds of practices to every initial submission. This architecture secures the revenue the clinical team has already earned, replacing an unpredictable leak with a steady, protected stream. For practice managers, the final hesitation is usually fear of a long, disruptive software integration period. But this process is built for speed. The team goes live in just 5 to 10 days, working directly inside your existing EMR. There is no massive new platform to learn. Practices can start with a 2-week risk-free pilot. By scoping this pilot to attack your highest urgency 30-day retro queue backlog, you can clear pending cases immediately. You don't have to take the industry data at face value. You can validate the throughput and accuracy numbers using your practice's data on your own terms. The clock on emergent care revenue is always ticking, but modern practices no longer have to lose the race. Keeping